Hi, this is Dr. Jewel Miller, and I'm here to talk about the execution by nitrogen gas last week in Alabama. It was the first time in this country that anyone's been executed with nitrogen gas, and it's being pushed in other states as well. Missouri and Oklahoma also allow execution by nitrogen gas, although it hasn't been tried there yet. And one question is this really more humane than any other means of execution? So I'm going to talk about this apart from the whole idea of whether there should be capital punishment or not. That's another issue. But purely on the basis of whether this is a humane way to kill somebody, and is it really any better than the other ways? So the people that have advocated for nitrogen gas execution have said that the person will be unconscious within seconds, they won't feel any pain, and then they'll die. So it's similar to what pretty much the proponent of every form of execution since the beginning of time has said, including hanging, the electric chair, lethal injection, etc. But every one of those instances of execution has had times when it hasn't worked out and where the victim has suffered. So let's look at this nitrogen gas execution. So last Thursday in Alabama, a man was executed, and the witnesses who were there at the time said that he didn't just pass out within a couple of seconds. That in fact, for a good 2 minutes, he seemed to writhe and fight against the restraints and shake the gurney he was on. And then only after about 2 minutes did he seem to pass out, and then kept breathing heavily for about 5 to 7 minutes before stopping breathing. So, what do we understand from this? Well, as a physician, I could explain this to you in medical terms, and I'm going to get to that. But I want you just to imagine for a second what it would be like. And the best way to imagine that is try holding your breath. Just take a deep breath and hold it. Now, at first, it's relatively easy. After all, you start with oxygen in your lungs, and your body will continue to supply oxygen to your brain for a time on the basis not only of what's in your lungs, but what's already in your blood from previous breaths before you held your breath. But then, after a while, as you know, if you've ever competed in a breath-holding contest when you were a kid, you'll start to run out of oxygen, and you'll start to feel that. You'll start to feel that oxygen hunger, and it will increase and increase until you can't resist it anymore and you take a big gasp of air. So the idea that somebody is just going to quietly and peacefully pass into unconsciousness while they're not getting any oxygen simply doesn't ring true from just a common sense perspective. Think of it another way. You might say, well, if you're holding your breath, you're starting with oxygen in your lungs, and that's what you're running through. And the person is breathing pure nitrogen, quickly their lungs are emptied of oxygen and it's replaced by nitrogen. But there's a whole group of people known as skin divers and people who will free dive, where they empty their lungs of air so that they can go deeper. Because if you hold your breath when you're swimming underwater, that is going to be like a balloon inside of you and tend to bring you to the surface. So they empty their breath and they go down as deep as they can. And some of those divers can go over a minute underwater collecting seashells or animals from the bottom of the ocean. So it's clear that even with no oxygen in your lungs, you can remain conscious and functional for several minutes from the experiences of those people. So obviously just putting nitrogen in your lungs isn't going to automatically kill somebody. You've got oxygen still in your blood from when you were breathing normal air right before that. And even with no oxygen at all, like if you have a heart attack, you've got about 5 minutes before your brain starts to undergo permanent brain death, or at least parts of your brain. So you've got a built-up oxygen reserve not only within your blood and all the other tissues in your body, but your brain as well. I've often wondered what it was like back in the old days when they used the guillotine and chopped someone's head off, because for at least 5 seconds, that person's brain would still be awake and aware of what's going on in that disembodied head. So it could be pretty gruesome. So there's no reason at all to believe that giving somebody nitrogen to breathe is going to make them quickly pass unconscious within a few seconds and not suffer. In fact, it's much more likely to feel like someone put a pillow over your face, or you're drowning. And you might say, if you want to put it in a more dramatic terms, that we're essentially waterboarding somebody to death when we give them nitrogen to breathe instead of oxygen. Because that same panic would begin to set in as soon as your body started to realize it wasn't getting the oxygen it needed. When you're holding your breath in a game, you realize it's a game and you can breathe anytime you want. But when your head's pushed underwater, or when someone puts a pillow on your face, you realize you're not going to get any more air, and panic sets in and terror. And obviously this guy, who went for 2 minutes of shaking and thrashing about on his gurney, was terrified. And that's unfortunate because, unless you want the person to suffer because of what they did, but if you want to humanely kill somebody, there's a whole bunch of ways you can humanely kill somebody. As a doctor, I had to learn in medical school how to save lives and keep people from dying, because there's so many ways people can die. And during the process of that, of course, I learned ways that are more difficult for the patient and ways that are easier for the patient. There's many physicians in the past who would give their patient a little bit extra dose of morphine to ease them on, not just their pain, but to ease them on their way when it was clear they were dying anyway. And of course, we've had debates in our society about the legality of that, but already throughout the world, there are civilizations, countries where assisted suicide is perfectly normal, especially in cases where somebody has a severe illness that's causing them pain and that they're not going to recover from. And there doesn't seem to be any problem with helping them to die peacefully. And they don't use nitrogen gas as far as I'm aware. So what are our other options? Well, apparently there's 6 different methods of execution in the United States that have been used. I won't go over all of them. It started with hanging. And you can ask yourself, well, is this nitrogen gas execution any better than hanging? And I don't know if it really is, honestly. But of the different ways that have been tried, really only one has been kind of scientifically studied, and that's been death by firing squad, where they hooked people up to EKGs during the process and could demonstrate that their heart stopped right away after being shot through the heart. Whereas all the other methods haven't really been scientifically studied as far as how much somebody's suffering or what their body is going through at the time. So in that sense, firing squad might be the most humane way. I think certainly a bullet to the head would be very quick and painless. And when we look at how our cattle killed, for instance, for our hamburgers and daily diet, well, people have tried to look into the most humane ways to kill cows. And generally, it's a bullet to the head or a bolt to the head. They have a special device. It's essentially shooting the cow in the head rather than trying to have it breathe nitrogen gas. I don't think that would go over very well with the cattle, and they would certainly thrash and knock down a bunch of stuff. So that wouldn't work too well. Lethal injection has been used, and that, if it's used properly, might be the best way to go. But apparently some of the countries who manufacture the ingredients for the lethal injections have objected to their product being used for lethal injections and then won't sell them to the prison system, and et cetera. But that seems kind of a ridiculous argument. You can go to any vet's office and get Fatal Plus, which is pentobarbital, which is the same chemical that was in the sleeping pill Nembutal that Marilyn Monroe overdosed with and easily died and passed away. You give a big shot of that, and we take our dogs when they're suffering and cats to the vet. That's what they give them to put them to sleep, and so it's not that hard a thing to do. And my God, there's all this fentanyl coming across the border. We could ask one of the fentanyl drug cartels to supply fentanyl for the prison system. I'm sure they'd be happy to charge a good amount for their fentanyl and have it used in the prison system. And everyone knows how dangerous that is. You give somebody an injection of that, there's no question they would die, and they would probably die a very pleasant death. Heroin users, fentanyl users, they use that drug because it makes them feel good. So, why not just give somebody some fentanyl, or give the prison system some fentanyl, or give them an injection? So the main point of all this is there's plenty of alternatives that could be worked out. And the one that's being tried now, nitrogen gas, is almost sure to cause significant panic, terror, oxygen hunger in the inmate right before they die. And that's very different from giving them a shot of fentanyl, for instance, or just a bullet to the head, which is instantaneous, as long as it's done right. So again, this is not an argument on whether there should be or shouldn't be capital punishment. It's just to point out that this method is probably a mistake. And it's set to become more widespread now that it's been used once. And unfortunately, the people that make the decisions about this aren't very well informed, and don't take the time to just think about what it would be like to not be able to breathe oxygen, what that would feel like, for anybody. So that's my thoughts for this week. Hope you have a good week.